Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, and thank you for tuning into the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. Today is Thursday, March 19th, and as we continue to creep day by day here, trying to follow along with the national news and what exactly is going on out there. Obviously, that's where we're going to start again today, with the coronavirus and what is going on globally, where we're at as a country, and then ultimately, obviously, tying it into what's going on with baseball out there. But worldwide, the coronavirus, the cases have topped 200,000, which means that they have doubled in nearly 2 weeks. So this virus continues to spread. Nobody's really sure when exactly we can expect it to slow down. Word coming out of China is that we're starting to get good news in Wuhan and other surrounding areas where the disease is said to have originated. I read some of their hospitals have begun to close down. The temporary hospitals, that is, that they built specifically for this virus, are beginning to slow down. They only had a handful of new cases over the past 24, 48, 72 hours, and things are starting to stabilize, which is good news and kind of a reference for us here in America, as we can basically see that the first case of this was known late November into December, so about 3 to 4 months, and the Chinese market and government is starting to once again get back to normal and stabilize. So hopefully here in America, we're not looking at a 3 to 4 month hiatus of everything going on, just due to the fact that we're a little bit better prepared than some of those other countries. Now, obviously, there's arguments being had about how prepared the U.S. is, but we got a little bit of a warning compared to China and the origination of this virus. But that'll be the topic of the first segment here, and specifically, once again, regarding baseball. When I spoke to you guys this Monday, we talked about how the announcement was made of a 2-week pushback, suspension, and kind of re-examine what's going on. Well, as of Monday evening into Tuesday, right after I got done recording for you guys out there, MLB released a statement from the league and the commissioner's office, and that statement read, "Today, Commissioner Robert Manfred conducted a conference call with 30 clubs of Major League Baseball. Following last night's newly updated recommendations from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, restricting events of more than 50 people for the next 8 weeks, the opening of the 2020 regular season will be pushed back in accordance with that guidance. MLB will keep fans updated on decisions regarding plans for the 2020 schedule in the days and weeks ahead. The clubs remain committed to playing as many games as possible when the season begins. We will continue to monitor ongoing events and undertake the precautions and best practices recommended by public health experts and urge all baseball fans to follow suit. MLB extends its best wishes to all individuals and communities who have been impacted by the coronavirus." There you have it. I talked about how on Monday's show they said 2 weeks. The agent market within the players, they were talking about April or May. Now we're looking at 8 weeks. That puts us into the middle of May, which means best case scenario, June 1st looks to be where they're going to kick off, or Memorial Day, I guess I should say, the end of May. And then I'm going to talk about here in just a couple of moments the 5 different options that I see currently available for Major League Baseball to move forward with their schedule, with the condensed schedule moving forward. But before we get to that, obviously, more breaking news has come out within Major League Baseball, or minor league baseball in this instance, and that is a second minor league player for the New York Yankees has tested positive for the coronavirus. There has yet to be a Major League Baseball player who has tested positive, but this is the second known baseball player to be tested, and the Yankees released the following statement late on Tuesday evening to let us all know about this result. We can confirm that a second minor league player from our player development complex has tested positive for the COVID-19 virus. While under self-quarantine, the player reported fatigue and an elevated body temperature to Yankees medical personnel. The test was administered on Sunday, and the player returned to self-quarantine following the positive results. We can also report that within the past 48 hours, his symptoms have dissipated. We will continue to follow all protocols and recommendations established by local and federal public health experts and Major League Baseball. So basically, once again, this is the scary part about this virus is the guy was just feeling a little tired, had a little bit of a fever, got tested positive 2 days later. He's not having any symptoms. He doesn't have a cough, he doesn't have a fever, but still clearly infected with this disease and could be contagious. So that's why this self-quarantine that all Americans should be under, unless there obviously is an emergency or you need to get to work, obviously I can understand that. But just in general, if you don't have to go out and about, I obviously recommend against doing so. But Yankees manager Aaron Boone, he had said he began driving from Florida back to his home in Connecticut to head home, and a lot of the players were doing the same out there. Again, on this last episode, Major League Baseball had given them the option of hanging around spring training, going to where they are from or home, or going to the home city of the team they are in. Well, now that there's an infection going around some of these spring training facilities, these players have been told to basically head home here, try to get workouts in wherever you can locally. Don't get together in large groups, but try to stay in shape. Ultimately, they do want to have a 2020 season moving forward here, and that's a good transition into about 4 or 5 different options or different scenarios that I have for you guys out there that I've heard around Major League Baseball or would make sense for Major League Baseball, but none of them sound tremendous. But having any sort of baseball is going to be better than no baseball whatsoever this summer, that's for sure. So the first scenario is best case scenario based on everything we're hearing and discussing, and that is opening day coming Memorial Day weekend. Like we talked about, 8 weeks puts you right in the middle of May. That gives you a 2-week spring training ramp up to begin around Memorial Day. The shortened spring training, they're probably going to have to increase the rosters, but if you start around Memorial Day, that gives you enough time to get in 100 to 110 games, depending on normal off days, less off days, what the agreements they come to there. But if you're able to get 100 games in, most likely you would start the playoffs on time in October. Maybe you push it back a week to get an extra 5 or 10 games in. But once again, best case scenario we're looking at is Memorial Day / June 1st kickoff, 100 games to be played, and the playoffs to be played on time. The next situation we're looking at is to start in the middle of June. Give it a 2-week later start. At that point, you're looking at about 90 games to be played. That means you're coming back spring training June 1st, a couple of weeks, getting about 90 games in. At this point, you would have to push back the postseason about a week or two, 7 to 10 days, in order to get 90 games in June, July, August, September, and then the first week of October to finish up that slate. You could still have a normal playoff scenario if that were the case. 90 games is probably about the cutoff where I would get to when it comes to maintaining consistency within the playoffs, because the next option we have here is starting around July 4th. Our National Independence Day could be a great way to get back to normal, starting off baseball, fireworks, hot dogs, summer barbecues. That could be a heck of a way to kind of get back to normal and our actual routines that we enjoy. But if you're not starting until July 4th, at most, you're looking at getting in 75 games for that season. Honestly, if this were the case, I would push back the playoffs 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even a month. Try to get to that 81 game mark. Try to get in at least half a year. But if you're starting July 4th, we're looking at about 75 games. And this is where things get tough because baseball being a marathon, a lot of times the standings after 75 games don't reflect the standings come the end of the regular season. And I'll get into some examples specifically in the next segment around instances where this happened and how it could change the thoughts of Major League Baseball and ultimately how many games they're trying to get in, because the last case scenario would be to start August 1st. And then you're playing about 50 games, truly a sprint. No all-star game, no trade deadline, 2 months of action, August, September. Maybe you go into October, you get 65 games in maximum. That's if you're pushing the playoffs back for an entire month or 3 weeks. At that point, I would just cancel the season. And I think August 1st, when we get to July 4th, if we are not having spring training games at that point, that's where you just have to suspend the season into next year. Because this last report that I've seen, or some suggestions out there, are talking about extending the season into November, December, however long it would take to play enough games where the MLBPA and the MLB decide this is what works for the year. Well, they would relocate games from the northern part of the country back down south, whether it's in their spring training facilities where it's still warm in November, December, or up north if they have a retractable roof or a dome that they're able to play in, they can stay in those instances. But teams like the Yankees, the Phillies, the Mets, any of those teams would obviously have to relocate back down to Florida, potentially playing in spring training where they can handle those games and are used to that kind of action. But that just gets too crazy. I don't see that happening at all. So here we are, the middle of March. We're taking at least 8 weeks off. That means we're in May. If we get another month, if we get to 3 months and we're in the middle of June, that's when you can start to ring the bell that we may miss an entire Major League season here in 2020. And then further questions come. If we do miss a year, how about service time? How about payment? All of that. And that's what we're going to discuss here in the second segment. We're going to continue the conversation around the coronavirus, how it's affecting Major League Baseball, and then ultimately more and more questions keep popping up on how we're going to handle this. So we're going to talk about those. Thanks for listening once again to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. Hang with us here for just a moment. We're going to play a word from one of our sponsors, and we'll talk to you guys in just a sec.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, and thanks for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. It is Thursday, March 19th. I appreciate you guys tuning in to GSMC here to discuss some baseball with myself. In that first segment, if you're just joining us, we talked about the coronavirus, gave an update on what's going on specifically for Major League Baseball. They are now on an 8-week hiatus. At the very least, all players were told to head home to either the home city of the team or your hometown, your home, wherever that may be. This is a little bit of a concern for international players. They are sticking around the home city of their teams, but a lot of other players have head home to wherever that may be with their families and try to stay as safe as possible. But there continue to be follow-up questions around Major League Baseball and the coronavirus, not only when they're going to return to play, which we discussed in that first segment, but more specifically here, secondary questions that are continuing to pop up. So the first one, once again, if baseball does come back, what is the playoff format going to look like? Is 80 games going to be enough? I laid out some scenarios where they play 100 to 110. Next one was about 90. Next one, 75 to 80, and then 50, and so on. And where is that magic number that is not enough games to determine ultimately if the right teams are going to make the playoffs? If you look back just specifically at 2019, through 80 games in the National League, the Phillies would have made the playoffs, the Rockies would have made the playoffs, and the Cubs would have made the playoffs. All three of those teams after 162 were absent from the postseason. And the name that you're probably thinking to yourself, hey, you didn't say them, the Washington Nationals would not have made the playoffs. That's right, the World Series champions from last year wouldn't have made it at 80 games. And that's one thing that makes baseball so special, is the marathon and not the sprint style of regular season that there is in football. And a team can get hot in July, August, September, and return from under 500 to making the playoffs and winning the World Series. And this is where the discussion a few months back, I know we did not discuss it with myself here on the podcast, but some of the playoff expansion that has been proposed, this was supposed to be in 2 to 3 years from now. However, if you're a player and you're only playing 80 games, as well as if you're a league, you're obviously looking at expanding the postseason. One, from the league's perspective, it gives you more games, which means more money, more revenue, more everything from the bottom dollar that they're looking at. And if you're a player's perspective, you're basically having the conversation I just told you about, that is, hey, this isn't enough games, so give more teams the opportunity, because you won't be watering down the postseason in this instance. It would actually be a solid representation of the potential teams that could have made a comeback and could make it. So do you extend it into 6 teams like the National Football League, or do you head to 7 teams or 8 teams and kind of make it a 1-year 8-team round-robin free-for-all? I don't think you go that far, but I do think you add probably one additional team, make it 6 teams, no buys, or even go 7 teams, give one team a bye, let the other 3 choose between each other. Either way, I think you're going to see an extended playoff format this year if they do return to the field and are able to play baseball this summer, whether that's June, July, August, whenever it may be. I would be excited for more playoff teams coming this way. The next question is around Spring Training 2.0, and a lot of reports within Major League Baseball, speaking to writers, reading articles, discussing things that happened around the strike in 1995. I was only a young buck at that time running around, didn't know anything about professional baseball regardless. But talking to the people who have covered the sport for a long time, they discussed about how it was about 2 weeks of a sprint for a Spring Training 2.0. I discussed that on the last episode, how I think they need 10, 17 days. You want to get maybe 2, 3 starts in for your starters, and if they're every 5th day, that gives you, day 1, day 5, day 10, they're throwing again. If you want to give them a third, then day 15, you could start regular season again. That's right over 2 weeks. You most likely have to expand the roster if this was the case, because a lot of these starting pitchers aren't going to be ready to throw 100 pitches right out of the jump, so you're going to need to have a few more relief pitchers that are currently available and can be used coming out of the bullpen. This year they had already agreed upon expanding the roster to 26, but I believe somewhere around 28 will be the sweet spot coming back out of the break. If it's, again, a shortened season, expanded playoffs, expanded roster, it's going to be very tricky to kind of iron out the details behind the scene. And the next 2 questions, or the next one, I guess, is will there be an All-Star game? And my answer is no way. The 2020 All-Star game has already been postponed or canceled in my eyes. Nobody has said anything, but even if they come back, best case scenario, on Memorial Day, what are you going to have, the All-Star break in after July, in August? It's just, after 50 games you're going to talk about All-Stars? Tech, the All-Star break sometimes is after 90 or 100 games. So the All-Star game already discontinued, already postponed, canceled, whatever you want to say, but there will be no All-Star magic for 2020 this summer. Now, that is not an official report. I don't have any sources behind the scene. That is just using my common sense and knowing the situation and what's going on. Don't anticipate seeing an All-Star game this summer or a midsummer classic. But trade deadline, this one is continuing to evolve. Memorial Day, mid-June, Then you could probably get away with the end of July. You'd be 2 months of action there, June and July. But if you get to July 4th, even later than that, you're looking at pushing this trade deadline back, that's for sure. Honestly, I anticipate having the trade deadline at the end of August. Realistically, this is probably my best prediction moving forward. I think they do open up the year middle of June or July 4th. To be completely honest with you, I think 8 weeks will be just short of when they'll be able to return. I think we're looking more into that 90-day marker, which puts you back at the end of May, Memorial Day, come back 2 weeks, middle of June, you're starting up there, end of June, July, playing through September, maybe into October, things along those lines. So I think that deadline would most make sense if you're starting around and you have 75, 80, 90 games after a month and a half, end of August, first week of September. Obviously, you'd only have one trade deadline. That's the new norm. As of last year, they eliminated the waiver wire deadline and just went with the straight trade deadline, so that should continue to be the norm here moving forward. A few additional questions around service time and free agency, about how ugly this could get between the players and the owners. So think about this for a second. Think about doomsday, worst case scenario, even not worst case, but think about not having a season of Major League Baseball this summer. What do you do when it comes to free agency? What do you do when it comes to service time? Is Mookie Betts still going to be a free agent after this summer if there's no baseball? Did the LA Dodgers just trade prospects to the Boston Red Sox for 0 games of Mookie Betts? And if you're Mookie Betts, on the flip side, you'd be 365 days older if you were not going to be a free agent after this summer. Instead of being 28 and entering free agency, you'd be 29 and entering free agency. Now, Mookie's still going to get paid, but let's say Cole Hamels or somebody who's kind of on the tail end of their career, maybe signs a 1-year deal at 36, 35. There's a difference there between 34 and 35. There's a difference on whether or not you're going to get paid. And as well as when it comes to service time, now you're talking about the rookies or the younger players in the league. You have to have 172 days right now to be counted as a full season for service time. And you have to have 3 years of full service time to hit arbitration eligibility. Now, any of these young kids, these rookies, does this count as a full year of service time? Are they a year closer to arbitration after this, or does nobody get any credit for this summer whatsoever happening, and everybody's just a year older if that's the case? And then transitioning into our final point here in the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, what about the Major League Baseball Draft? That's scheduled for June. As of now, it's supposed to go off without a hitch, but there were recent reports that came out. Effective immediately, Major League Baseball is temporarily prohibiting all scouting activity, both domestic and international. No tryouts, public or private, no attending of amateur games, showcases, or workouts, and no in-home or in-person visits. Only able to scout remotely. With so much uncertainty, Major League Baseball does not want any club seeking a scouting advantage over any other. That's a wild time, man, to have a Major League Draft without any season this year. Obviously, a lot of times juniors, they'll have their eyes on, okay, how did they develop into their senior season? What were they working on? Did they get stronger? Did they throw harder? Did they run faster? Where are his stats? You know, how did the opposing teams attack him? Was he able to make adjustments moving forward? All of these things that scouts and teams currently evaluate between year to year when it comes to the amateur draft, and these college kids or international kids that are draft eligible, they're not going to have any of this information. Any video they're going to have is going to be a year old, 6 months old, unless people are releasing videos from them working out, just hitting off a tee. It's not going to be any live numbers or live action. That will be something to keep an eye out on. I don't know if the draft will eventually move. The NFL is keeping the draft where it is right now, so maybe Major League Baseball is kind of following suit when it comes to activities that don't have to be done in person or large groups and can take place remotely moving forward. that wraps it up here for the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We talked about all the different things coronavirus here for the first 20 minutes or so. I know you guys may be getting sick of it by now out there, but obviously it's still front page news. It's still driving the cycle, and we're continuing to gather updated information, and the sports world is continuing to take that information to try to make the best decisions possible for everybody's health here moving forward. But when we come back after this break and a word from one of our sponsors, we'll hop into segment 3 where we'll begin to do some predictions and previews around Major League Baseball. I know in the past on this podcast there have been some preview shows, but that was before you guys got to listen to me. So I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. I'm going to preview the NL West coming up after the break here, so hang with us for a brief moment, and we'll talk to you guys on the other side.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you're just joining us for the first 20 minutes and the first couple of segments, we talked about the coronavirus and the information that's continuing to come out day to day, and the updates that Major League Baseball is making to their schedule, their available options, the Major League Draft coming up, everything they're doing with service time, paying players, minor leaguers, major leaguers. We're going to continue to keep you guys updated every week here, as I'm sure new information continues to pile in day to day. So if you're thinking to yourself, man, more coronavirus talk, yeah, more coronavirus talk, because it's what's going on, and it's front page news, keeping everybody concerned there at home. But for this third segment, we're going to have a little bit more fun here. We're going to get back onto the diamond, talk actual baseball, and discuss some of the divisions around Major League Baseball over the course of the next couple of episodes. We'll preview every division out there, 2 at a time, 2 per episode. In this episode, we'll start in the National League. We're going to go from West Coast to East Coast. So we're going to start out with the NL West, going in alphabetical order for the preview, and then ultimately I will give you my take and prediction on where they finish in the standings moving forward. But starting off with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Arizona was 85-77 last year. They made a huge splash in the offseason. They made a flurry of moves. When you look at the NL West, Arizona was certainly the most active out of all 5 teams. Now, I'm not sure this will lead to a divisional crowd, because the LA Dodgers are still in the division and still reign supreme, but they did add Madison Bumgarner to lead the offseason additions. Everybody knows Mad Bum from his time with the San Francisco Giants, and more recently being a rodeo participant here in the offseason, going over a pseudo name Undercover, which nobody knew about until the last month or so, where he was doing some riding. He wasn't bull riding, he was doing some calf roping, I believe is what it was called. So, yeah, either way, if you're the Arizona Diamondbacks, you can't be happy, and the reports came out that they had no idea that he was doing this under a false name, that even his wife would call him in public so nobody would catch on to it. But 3 years later, somebody figured it out, and now Mad Bum is probably going to have to hang up the rodeo shoes and lead this rotation moving into 2020. He will be joined in the rotation by left-hander Robbie Ray, who's been talk of a few different trade discussions. Ultimately, Arizona has decided to hang on with him. Right-hander Mike Leake rounds out the rotation along with Luke Weaver and Zach Gallen. That'll be an interesting rotation for them, obviously adding Mad Bum and Robbie Ray, both lefties up at the top, and then kind of filling out with middle of the rotation right-handed pitching. It'll be interesting to see if that will be able to hold up over the course of 100 games or however many games will be played. But they also made a few additions to their offense, signing catcher Stephen Voigt. He will be the backup catcher. He comes over from the Oakland A's. They added right fielder Cole Calhoun, who everyone knows out there from his time with the LA Angels, relief pitcher Hector Rendon, and they also added Starling Marte via a trade in the offseason. And not to mention the return of two gentlemen who had crazy years last year, but Ketel Marte and Eduardo Escobar had fantastic years offensively, and if they can keep that going in Arizona, they think the additions of Calhoun, Bumgarner, Voigt, Rendon will obviously continue to improve this team, where they made a late push, finishing 85 and 77, were a potential wild card contender. And depending on how Mad Bum continues to perform, there were concerns based on the wear and tear on his arm, that 5-year deal may be a little bit too long for him. But I like where Arizona is as a ball club. I think they're coming into their own here in 2020. I think they're on the upswing and possibly could challenge the Dodgers. Now, I don't think they're going to challenge them for winning the division, but I don't think they're going to roll over any longer, that's for sure. And, right now, like I said, I'll give you guys my standings at the end, but I like where Arizona sees themselves heading into 2020. Next up, we got the Colorado Rockies. Oh, man, what's going on in Colorado? Colorado was 71 and 91 last year, and they didn't make any moves during the offseason. They made, I think, 2, and none of them even made the back page in the sports newspaper section. It was amazing to see. They made a ton of minor league contract offers and agreements with a bunch of guys out there who you'd recognize the name but aren't going to make a difference when it comes to major league positioning and performance. And of course, everybody knows it was because of this and not being competitive last year and making absolutely no moves in the offseason, so it looks like they're going to be worse than they were last year, is they've alienated Nolan Arenado. Nolan Arenado signed an 8-year, $260 million deal just before last season, and the communication from Colorado was that they're going to put a competitive team around him. They're going to try to win every one of those 8 years where Nolan Arenado is here. Well, they're 0 for 1 and then made absolutely no moves moving forward to try to go 1 for 2. So they're going to be 0 for 2 on the competitive side of the National League West, and this is where the story continues to lead. Arenado comes out saying, hey, these bridges are burned. I'm not going to be able to go back there, so we'll see if he performs ultimately, and then how far out they find themselves around the trade deadline. Again, this whole timing thing and potential elimination of a trade deadline very much complicates what the Colorado Rockies have going on, but this is a team that's heading the wrong way, and I think finds themselves at the bottom of the division this year. Next up, the LA Dodgers. Everybody knows what they did this offseason. They added Mookie Betts and David Price to an already loaded team that won 106 games last year. Mookie Betts is the 3rd MVP currently on this roster for 2020. He joins Cody Bellinger and Clayton Kershaw as the other two to previously win the award. And, adding Betts to the outfield, it allows flexibility for the Dodgers heading into this season as well, because just last year they signed A.J. Pollock to, I believe, a 4-year, $40+ million deal where he's got $3 and $30 and change still left. But with Betts, Bellinger, and Peterson manning the 3 outfield spots, that's a lot of money for a 4th outfielder coming off the bench. So whatever the weakness the Dodgers think this team may have, if they're 100% healthy, A.J. Pollock could be a trade deadline piece to add maybe another starting pitcher or a relief pitcher or what have you. But he's a heck of an outfielder to be coming off the bench, and if I'm A.J. Pollock, I'm not exactly pleased with what's going on since I've been there. But even with the trade, giving up prospects for Betts and Price, the Dodgers still have 7 of the top 100 prospects in baseball based on Baseball America. So they're still loaded in the minor leagues. They haven't mortgaged the future to go for it this year, but obviously, can they get over the hump? Can they finally win it all? They're always back into the World Series, haven't won it yet. And then the last question is, can they top 106 wins from last year? Pitching would be my only question mark. They lost Rich Hill. They lost Ryu. They traded Maeda. They're counting on some of these younger arms to continue to come up and develop and shove for them. So obviously, I think they're going to win the division. Over 106, which was a club record, would be difficult to top, but I see them winning triple digits once again this year if you were to play 162. So, now it's probably based on winning percentage is what you should talk about. The San Diego Padres are next up on the list. They were 70-92 last year. They continue to make splashes in the offseason with free agency. 2 years ago, signing Eric Hosmer. Last year, signing Manny Machado. This year, they decided to change up the coaching staff. They got a new manager taking over. They added Tommy Pham and Trent Grisham from the offensive side. Fernando Tatis Jr. looked tremendous in the 85 games or so that he played last year, hitting over 300, a bunch of dingers, RBIs. He is the top prospect in baseball and very soon could become a top player in baseball and shed that prospect label. They got Chris Paddock on the mound. He was on an innings restriction last year, was very successful. They're going to continue to try to develop his arm. That could be a blessing for them, playing 100 games, as you won't have to have an innings limit on people like Chris Paddock, Manny Machado, Hosmer, Pham, Grisham, Tatis Jr. Comes down to pitching for the Padres, but could this be the first year where they get over 500 since 2010? Man, it's been a decade for them over 500, and I think some of these moves they've made, some of these kids coming up as their minor league system is one of the best in all of baseball, I think they're in for a good spot and have wild card aspirations and could be in it coming down the stretch, specifically this year when it's a shortened season and not enough time to maybe make all those mistakes. The last club in the NL West, the San Francisco Giants. Last year at 77-85, they're having a makeover as an organization. Gabe Kapler comes in and replaces Bruce Bochy. They move on from Bruce after 3 World Series titles. Kapler comes over from Philadelphia. They lost Mad Bum. They traded Will Smith. They're starting an entire rebuild, which is why Kapler was attractive to them, because he had just gone through this with the Philadelphia Phillies and bringing on and developing their young players. He wasn't able to hang on long enough to see him take the next step, which they're supposed to do this year. But it's a very similar situation out west in San Francisco, a much better fit, a much better crowd to understand Gabe, as Philadelphia kind of ran him out of town after 2 years and booed him opening day when he removed Aaron Nola after 6 solid innings and ended up losing the ball game. But Buster Posey, he'll look for a rebirth, continuing at first base. Former second overall pick Joey Bart, the catcher out of Georgia Tech, looks to be the heir apparent behind the dish for them. We'll see him at some point this summer, as once again, they're rebuilding, not looking great for them this year. They're one of those teams that's tanking and looking towards the future. So out of the 5 teams in the NL West, the Giants and Rockies both look very, very bad. 65, 70 win teams, again, if you were playing 162. So it comes down to the Dodgers, Diamondbacks, and Padres. And that's the order I think these guys are going to fall into. The Dodgers win the West, the Diamondbacks number 2, the Padres number 3, both right around 500, both fighting for wild cards, and then the Giants and Rockies in a very, very distant 4th and 5th out west. So that wraps up this segment discussing, predicting the NL West results, talking about all 5 teams out there. Right now, we're going to pause for a word from one of our sponsors, and when we come back on the other side, we'll discuss the NL Central, our second and final prediction and preview segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Hang with us out there. We'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always, here on Mondays and Thursdays, moving forward throughout the rest of the summer, talking all things Major League Baseball. Obviously, we started off the show today talking coronavirus and continuing to discuss the possibilities around scheduling, the follow-up questions around free agency, service time, payment, all of these questions that every one of you guys have out there. I'm doing my best to continue to try to answer them for you. And then last segment, we got into an NL West preview. And then this segment, we're jumping into the National League Central as we're moving West Coast to East Coast, a couple divisions at a time. So this will be the last one for this episode. But looking into next week, we'll go NL East, AL East, and then we'll work back east to west on the American League side. So, National League Central. Let's see here. Starting off alphabetically once again, and then getting into my standings. The Chicago Cubs. They finished last year at 84-78. David Ross replaces Joe Maddon this offseason. The Cubs decide it's finally time to move on from Joe Maddon. Just need a new voice, new energy, new culture in the building. Obviously, Joe Maddon, the only human to be able to say he was the manager when the Chicago Cubs won the World Series. It had to be a difficult decision to move on from him, but things were getting a little bit stale, and a shakeup was needed in the locker room. So David Ross comes over after a few years at ESPN. Obviously, he was a player there with the Cubs, so some of his former teammates will now be his players, and that dynamic can be a little bit tricky sometimes, going from a friend to a manager, so to speak, and being able to have authority and confidence to lead those individuals. Because the Cubs, they really didn't make any moves this offseason. They lost Cole Hamels. They didn't really make any key additions. They're counting on their starting pitching staff to carry them, as well as some of the veteran names that everybody knows out there. Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, Jason Hayward, Javier Baez. All of these guys are back. They're trying to run it back. It's a very similar team that won it in 2016, so they continue to think that we'll have bounce-back years. But obviously the rumors of Chris Bryant being on the trade market, and if the Cubs find themselves this year 5-10 games out of first place come the trade deadline, I do think Theo Epstein's going to sell. I don't think he's going to be a buyer this year. He's going into this year being a seller, and this team is going to have to perform otherwise to make him change his mind. And again, the starting staff of Yu Darvish, everybody's counting on Yu Darvish after an excellent close to last season, but you got John Lester, Hendricks, Quintana. They need that rotation to step up and carry this team, and then the offense to bounce back to where they were in years past if they're going to make a move in this NL Central. Personally, at 84-78, a year older, not many additions, I don't know if the Cubs are going to be winning this division here at the end of the summer. The next squad to talk about, the Cincinnati Reds, 75-87 last year, but have decided to make some moves. They made quite a few auditions. First off, offensively, 4 years and $64 million for Mike Moustakas and Nick Castellanos. Castellanos went from the White Sox to the Cubs last year, now signs with the Reds, sticking in the National League Central. Moustakas, coming over from Kansas City, finally gets his long-term deal after a few short-term deals in Kansas City when he continued to perform. They also added Japanese outfielder Shogo Akiyama, who's coming over from Japan. Obviously, there's some skepticism around his transition and how seamless he will be able to come over and continue to hit from Japan to America, but he put up nice stats over there, so it's a solid move from Cincinnati's perspective. And then the rotation, it's deep as well, just like Chicago. They got Castillo, Sonny Gray, Bauer, who's over there from the Cleveland Indians. Trevor Bauer's been added. So the top three there is as deep as anybody. And Castillo's changeup being one of the most disgusting pitches in all of Major League Baseball, they got a nice top end. And if they can get offense from the likes of Moustakas, of Castellanos, of Akiyama, they could find themselves inching up into this wild card picture and possibly surprise some teams, because after a few different years in the basement, they crept their way up to fourth. Now this could be a launching pad here starting in 2020 to getting to the top of this division and surprising some people. So keep an eye out on the Cincinnati Reds as one of those potential surprise clubs that nobody's really talking about right now. The Milwaukee Brewers, they finished last year at 89-73. A lot of turnover has happened in Milwaukee. 14 new players on the 40-man roster. Wow, what is that math? 26, almost two-thirds of, almost one-third. Excuse me, 26 out of 40 was two-thirds is what I was thinking out loud there, but almost a third new individuals on the 40-man roster. They lost Grandal, they lost Moustakas, they lost Pomeranz, they lost Thames, they lost Shaw. Man, they lost a ton in Milwaukee. However, they did sign Christian Yelich to a 7-year, $188 million extension, which keeps him in Milwaukee for another 8 years, I believe it is. It was an extension on top of his original deal that he had signed with the Marlins a few years back. But this is going to be the first year in what's an interesting rebuild in Milwaukee. Now, Craig Counsell, the manager there, has been known to get the most out of any of his players. He's known around baseball as a difference maker from the managerial position, because if you look on paper in years past, this team wasn't supposed to perform as well as it did. So he's made the right calls. He rides the hot hand on the mound, whether it's not the sexy thing to do. He knows how to get it done. So I don't want to completely write off the Milwaukee Brewers just based off of Yelich, Counsell, a few other individuals they have there. But I do think a step back this year is in their future. Now, talking about the Pittsburgh Pirates, oh, goodness gracious. Again, being outside of Philadelphia, only about 4.5 hours from the city of Pittsburgh, that city is not very high on that baseball team after 20 straight years of losing seasons. Yes, they made the wild cards back-to-back years, but never paid anybody, never signed their internal talent, never signed a huge free agent to get them over the hump, and now they've blown it up once again, and they were back to 69 and 93 last year, and I don't think this year is going to be any better. It's another long year. Yes, they clean house. They got a new general manager, Ben Cherington, a new manager, Derek Shelton. That'll be a nice culture change, a new voice, new energy in the locker room there. Chris Archer on the mound. He can obviously throw the pill. He came over from the Rays. He'll be a trade candidate come the middle of the year for teams looking to add cheap, good, young starting talent. And then at first base, Josh Bell. Obviously the all-star for them last year, had a ridiculous number of RBIs pre-all-star break. Slowed down a little bit on the second half of the season. But Josh Bell, Chris Archer, they're going to be fun to watch. But overall, Pittsburgh under 69-93 and where their win total was last year. One of the most intriguing teams in this division is the St. Louis Cardinals. St. Louis finished last year at 91 and 71. And they decided to have a pretty quiet offseason. Now, they did lose Ozuna in the outfield, but they have prospect Dylan Carlson, who hit the cover off the baseball across AA and AAA last year, so they're looking for him to possibly come up and establish himself at the big league level sooner than later. But they're obviously going to be relying on their rotation, relying on Matt Carpenter, Yadier Molina, Paul Goldschmidt, the standard cast of characters. Goldschmidt entering, I believe it is year 2 of the 5-year, $130 million deal. He had his worst year as a pro last year, or at least it felt like that. And then at the end of the year, you look up and the guy's got 35 and 100. And you're going, wait a minute, I thought that guy was struggling. Yeah, he turned it around and turned it on, which was one of the reasons why down the stretch they were able to extend their lead and ultimately win that division over the Brewers for 2 games at 91, and the Brewers win in 89 games. So a few teams, again, the Cardinals had a quiet offseason. The Cubs were relatively quiet, but the Reds decide to make a move and make a push moving forward. So I like this division. I think it's wide open. I think it's going to be very entertaining. Outside of the Pittsburgh Pirates, who I have in Tanksville and down the bottom, the other 4 teams, depending on injuries, depending on availability, how some of these veterans continue to bounce back, we could have 1 through 4 shift regardless of where you are. But I think St. Louis wins the division yet again. I think Yadier Molina, starting pitching, bullpen, Goldschmidt, all of those names will have a solid summer, win the division once again. But my surprise team that I think could be across Major League Baseball, finishing second here and possibly getting a wild card, is those Cincinnati Reds. I like the rotation of Castillo, Gray, and Bauer. The additions of Moustakas and Castellanos are going to be tremendous for them. Ultimately, I think they end up just higher than the Chicago Cubs. I think the Cubs play good baseball under David Ross, get back to fundamentals, get back to playing good defense, good base running, as they were one of the worst base running teams last year. So I think they're going to finish right around 500. I don't think they make the playoffs in Chicago, but I think they're around 500. And then I personally see the Brewers taking a big step back this year. All of that turnover, once again, 14 new players on the 40-man roster leads them to a fourth-place finish and ultimately missing the playoffs. And I'm going Cardinals, Reds, Cubs, Brewers, Pirates in that order for the NL Central. But that wraps up the fourth segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Once again, I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. If you haven't done so already, now's the time. I'm going to ask you guys, go out on social media. Head to Twitter, head to Facebook, head to Instagram. Follow GSMC Baseball Podcast on all platforms. I am now running the Twitter feed, also keeping everybody up to date on the social media platforms. That's a great way to get all your information constantly, and then we'll keep you updated on every new episode we release and what we're talking about and what's going on. But that'll do it for the previews and predictions on today's episode. We're going to pause right now for a brief word from one of our sponsors, and then on the flip side, we're going to talk about all the injuries across Major League Baseball, what the delays to the coronavirus are going to, how they're going to impact those injuries, if those guys will be back and ready to go, or if they're still going to be out no matter when we start. But quite a few names to talk about on the injury list. Hang with us here for just a moment, and we'll catch you right on the other side.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Once again, I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, here on Thursday, March 19th. You'll be able to hear my beautiful voice every Monday and Thursday moving forward here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. So please hit subscribe, rate, review the podcast wherever you guys are listening, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all across the board. The GSMC Baseball Podcast is available wherever you're getting your podcasts. So please share the word. Please talk to some of your friends out there who are baseball fans who would enjoy listening to the podcast where we're discussing all things Major League Baseball. Today so far we've talked about the coronavirus and all the details that are coming out around that, changing day to day, ever evolving, and then we were previewing the National League West and the National League Central, and I gave you guys my take on who's going to win those divisions, and that'll be the Dodgers and the Cardinals for those of you scoring at home, with wild card interest in Arizona, San Diego, and then Cincinnati and Chicago. So far, those are your teams to look out for this summer. But here in the fifth segment, we're going to discuss some of the injuries across Major League Baseball and how this delay, this pushback has affected some of those timelines. Obviously, we touched on it, a minimum 8 weeks until spring training will be back again and underway. I think that's very optimistic. We're looking at about the month of June until we're going to hit the ground running here. But running through the injuries on a national scale, talking about a few individuals recently injured or currently where they're at here in alphabetical order. Mike Leake for the Arizona Diamondbacks. He had a fracture in his left wrist. He's still hopeful of being ready for when they return. His expected return was the middle of May. He was looking at missing about 2 months here, but like we discussed, should now be ready for when action returns to the diamond. Next up for the Atlanta Braves, Cole Hamels. He hurt himself on February 12th, almost a month ago. At that point, it didn't look like he'd be ready due to left shoulder irritation or inflammation, but give him a few more months, some rehab starts, and he may be able to help out the Atlanta Braves for the entirety of this season now that everything has been pushed back. Trey Mancini for the Baltimore Orioles. He had a non-baseball medical procedure. He underwent surgery to remove a tumor from his colon. Timetable won't be determined until later, but they're not expecting him until July or August. But instead of missing half the year, Trey may only miss a month or so in Baltimore. But things aren't looking that great in Baltimore, so I don't think they're going to be rushing him back this summer either and trying to get him back playing. So Chris Sale for the Boston Red Sox, he's had a couple of different injuries, elbow discomfort, he had pneumonia, a flexor strain. He's dealing with a few different things. They're electing not to have surgery as of now, going the rehab route. He was supposed to miss a few months of the season. Once again, he could come back ready to go if they kick off in June or July. So good news for Red Sox fans is that you could have Chris Sale for pretty much the entirety of the season. In Cleveland, Mike Clevinger, he had a partial tear of his left medial meniscus. I know I struggled through saying that, but he underwent surgery to repair a torn meniscus in his left knee. And they don't have a timetable currently for him, but he was getting close to baseball activity last I had heard before this shutdown was suggested from the CDC and Major League Baseball. So if he continues to progress in rehab here while everyone's away, an expected return date of June, which I believe is what they were targeting, getting him back to activity, obviously then off a mound, then into a minor league game, getting ready up to the major leagues, a few different months, and that could be a benefit for the Indians and adding to their rotation as they're trying to make moves in the AL Central and continue to win that division along with Minnesota, who's putting together a nice team out there. The Houston Astros have a couple of different injuries. First up is Yordan Alvarez. He's having some knee problem. He's been held out of spring training games due to some knee issues. He's day-to-day, so he'll be good to go once we return. But the big news that came out just the past couple of days is that Justin Verlander had surgery to repair his right groin. He's expected to be out about 6 weeks. GM James Click came out and made an announcement. The timing gives Verlander time to heal over the course of the next 2 months. Once again, 8 weeks until we have any clue when we're playing in baseball. So Verlander was originally going to miss a month and a half, 2 months of the season. Now, once again, should be available for its entirety. That is, with these injuries, that is one positive with pushing back the season, is these are a lot of big names that I'm currently reading off here that would have missed time. And this is part of the problem with baseball and with their popularity is the injuries to top-end talent and missing extended time. So good news for Verlander is he should be back ready to go 6 to 8 weeks. And once again, games will be coming in 8, 10, 12 weeks. So he should be good to go. The Angels, Griffin Canning, he had right elbow irritation. He'll be fine. He's shut down for about a month. He'll be back by the time. And then the team everyone knows about, the New York Yankees, Aaron Hicks. Hicks is going to have Tommy John surgery, so he will not be back this summer, regardless of when any baseball is played. He had that at the end of last year, so he's out the entirety of this year. Along with Luis Severino, he had Tommy John surgery as well and will miss the entirety of 2020. So Hicks and Severino will not be back. However, the other three individuals and superstars, really, should all return. Giancarlo Stanton, who had a right calf strain, he's close to being cleared for running. Obviously, that means within 2 months he will be back. James Paxton, the pitcher, he had back surgery on February 5th. It was said that he would be out until the month of May or June, so even if Paxton's a little bit slow out of the gates in July, should be available for the majority of the season if it's pushed back. And then Aaron Judge. Judge has been diagnosed with a stress fracture in his right rib. They're evaluating whether it's going to need surgery or not, but the latest from Aaron Boone and his camp was that he should be available with this delay, with 2 months off. Should be good to go by the time this gets back, and they don't anticipate surgery moving forward for Aaron Judge. So Judge, Paxton, and Stanton all right now should return when Major League Baseball does as well. The Philadelphia Phillies, Andrew McCutchen. Andrew McCutchen's turning off of ACL surgery in his left knee. He was going to miss opening day. They were shooting for a return around May 1st. Once again, with the 8 weeks, that allows him to be your opening day left fielder or center fielder, wherever you want to put McCutchen out there to make it a best fit for the Philadelphia Phillies. And then going down the list here, wrapping up, Willie Calhoun for the Texas Rangers. He suffered a fractured jaw after being hit in the mouth by a pitch by the Dodgers' Julio Urias during a spring training game. He was expected to miss 2 months, and now he'll be ready to return in the middle of May for the Rangers. So quite a few different names floating around there that really would have missed extended amounts of time, but now should be able to compete for the entirety of the season. And then you have a few lingering issues. They're not listed on any of the injury reports, but the likes of Max Scherzer, who shut down due to right side fatigue in spring training. He was going to miss a start, kind of working through it. He spoke about how you have to tire yourself out come at the end of spring to get ready to go for the long season. So it's not an injury of concern for Scherzer, just fatigue. But either way, he'll continue to work through that discomfort over the next couple of months. He'll be good to go. Michael Conforto for the Mets, he had an oblique issue. Anybody out there who's been a hitter knows how much oblique issues can linger if you don't give them enough time to heal properly. They can continue to bounce back. That's one of those where you come back and then after a week again, you re-injure the oblique and now you got to sit out even longer than you were the first time. So you really have to be smart when it comes to obliques, sides, anything with twisting and hitting could be an issue, that's for sure. So let's see. Miles Mikolas, right-handed pitcher for the Cardinals. He's had an issue with his right flexor tendon, elbow issues. Nobody really loves to see those. They're optimistic he can make a return here in a couple of weeks, but he's coming off a year last year with 184 innings and 17 quality starts. That's a lot of innings for a kid who hasn't put that much strain on his arm for that extended period of time. Cole Hamels for the Braves, we touched on it, his shoulder. And then lastly here, Byron Buxton, center fielder for the Twins. Buxton, obviously known as one of the top prospects in baseball about 4 or 5 years ago, has never really turned into that complete player that they thought he would be, but runs down everything in center field. He had surgery on his shoulder in the offseason. He was going to be questionable for opening day, but over the course now of June, July, August, he should be available and ready to go for the Minnesota Twins as they continue to try to make a run here in the AL Central. So a lot of injuries across the board. Positive news for anybody who's a little bit dinged up. Like we said, only a handful of guys are going to miss the entirety of the year. Unfortunately, 2 of them are New York Yankees in this instance, coming off of Tommy John surgery, so they'll be unavailable regardless of when Major League Baseball decides to begin to play once again. But that'll wrap it up for this segment. GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you're just joining us, once again, we talked about the coronavirus, when ultimately baseball will decide to come back. I gave 3 or 4 different options that have been discussed internally within Major League Baseball and what they think the best overall decision will be on a timetable moving forward for returns. And then a lot of the follow-up conversation around service time, free agency, the draft, everything along those lines. We then previewed the National League West and the National League Central. I gave you guys my divisional winners there of the Dodgers and the Cardinals. I have winning the National League Central. And then here in this segment, just giving an update on injured players around the league, currently where they're at in their process, if they're going to need more rehab time, if they want the league to start on Memorial Day, or if they're even pushing to get into June or July, because they have these types of superstars now available for the entirety of the year, whether that's 50, 75 games, whatever it may be. It increases the chances of you having a much more successful season, and with an extended playoff field, which I believe is going to happen, and there are murmurs around the industry that they're going to extend the playoffs due to lack of games and ultimately determining who the team should be that are into the postseason. It's something to really look forward to. Again, that'll wrap up this segment. Coming back here on our last and final segment, I'll be talking about my top 5 ballpark foods that I want to try across all of America. Being from Philadelphia, I've probably been to 15, 20 of the parks out there. Haven't tried any of these top 5 foods that I'm going to get into. And no, I'm not talking Ballpark Frank. we're going to get into the good stuff out there. So hang with us. We'll pause right now for a brief word from one of our sponsors, and then on the flip side, we're going to have a good time for the final 10 minutes or so. So hang with us out there. Kevin Mahalik, GSMC Baseball Podcast. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, and in this last segment, we always have a little bit of fun here, wrapping up the show. In today's episode, a little bit of a somber beginning with the coronavirus going on, talking about all the different schedules. We then previewed the NL West, NL Central in today's episode, so I wanted to end with some fun. And today's top 5 list. Last week I gave you guys the top 5 most intriguing World Series matchups that I would enjoy this upcoming season. Today I'm going to give you the top 5 ballpark foods that I want to try all around the country here. Out of the 30-some ballparks, even more than that, if you count the ones that have been replaced, like Veterans Stadium with Citizens Bank Park. But let's jump into it here. Let's talk about the top 5 foods that I want to try throughout the country. We'll rank them 5 to 1, starting out with number 5, Esquites. It is in the LA Dodger Stadium. In Dodger Stadium, it is corn in a cup topped with mayo, cheese, and topped with spicy aioli. Oh, baby, that sounds good. Sweet grilled corn, mayo, cojilla cheese, and chipotle aioli in a souvenir mini helmet meant for ice cream. I love me some street corn, that spicy aioli. Whew, baby, get it out in L.A., I'm sure it's going to be delicious. So that's number 5. Number 4, we're talking about the Pittsburgh Cone. Listen to what's in this Pittsburgh Cone. This is pretty outrageous, if you ask me here. The Pittsburgh Cone features kielbasa, pierogi, Swiss cheese, sauerkraut, and Russian dressing, all of which is served in a waffle cone. What? That? It's kielbasa, pierogi, Swiss cheese, sauerkraut, and Russian dressing, all in a waffle cone. Now, it's almost too much, but that's why I needed to try it, because I enjoy all those things. Now, granted, it's usually, separate and in moderation, but throw it all in a waffle cone, you may be onto something there. All I know is you're going to need quite a few napkins to put that one down if you're going in Pittsburgh to PNC Park. Number 3 is the Fritos Pie Corn Dog with the Houston Astros down there in Houston, completely over the top and delicious. The Fritos Pie Corn Dog is a foot-long hot dog dipped in house-made Fritos batter. Then it is deep-fried, covered in Fritos, queso blanco, and Texas chili. So you basically get a deep-fried hot dog. They put batter on the hot dog, and then they top on it with cheese and chili and Fritos. And, oh, baby, look at that. Oh, man, looking at a picture, a deep-fried hot dog. That just takes it to the next level right off the bat. I don't even know. Can you handle a deep-fried hot dog? If I ever get to Houston, I'm going to find out. So that one looks delicious. Moving up to number 2, we have the bone-in smoked beef short rib. This one is offered at the Washington National Stadium. So if you're in the nation's capital and you want to check out some awesome barbecue, head no further than the ballpark because, let's see here, at about a smoked bone-in beef short rib. Based on the context here, they basically give you a couple pounds of this short rib. It's available at Old Hickory Barbecue Stand. Whew, no man, that looks delicious. And I have that one number 2. The other ones are a little bit crazy. Esquite, street corn, nothing crazy. The Pittsburgh cone and the Frito pie corn dog obviously are a little bit outside the box. But this one just gets me to the core. And who doesn't love good old-fashioned barbecue? Being able to sit down at the ballpark, at the game, have the bone-in short rib. Oh, gosh, throw the different barbecue sauces on there. Get an adult beverage if you're of age. If not, a nice Coca-Cola, throwing it down with the barbecue with the family at the game. There's nothing better than this summer. So hopefully we can get out to the ballpark soon enough. Just thinking about it, man, it's making me a little bit hungry here. I may have to step away from recording, get in the kitchen, and make some barbecue for myself. It's pretty outrageous. But my number 1 ballpark food that I want to try here, and it's at a stadium that I have actually been at. I haven't been there since I lived outside of Dallas, Texas in 2002, and that is the Texas Rangers Stadium. Now, they're moving to a new stadium, so I would assume this one would come with it. This food option would come with it for 2020 and not be left in the dust for 2019. Once again, I'm going off kind of last year's options just due to everything going on this year. But this one is called the Foul Pole, and it is offered by the Texas Rangers. It is pretty outrageous. It is a 2-pound chicken tender. Think about that. 2-pound chicken tender, like chicken fingers. It's a 2-pound, it almost looks 2 feet long for a chicken tender. It is served on a bed of waffle fries and obviously all the different dipping sauces. But this brings me back to my middle school days where I would pack a lunch every day to school. And then there was one day a week where I was able to get lunch money and purchase lunch, and obviously they have all the different options as a middle schooler. But every time, because it was once a week, I would get that large order of chicken fingers and that large order of French fries, barbecue sauce, honey mustard, ketchup. Oh, man, but 2 pounds of chicken, not even tenders. It's the fact that it's a singular chicken tender, 2 feet long and 2 pounds, known as the Foul Pole, offered by the Texas Rangers. But I would love to hear from some of our listeners out there in the comment section if any of you have tried any of these food options, whether it's Esquite out in L.A., the Pittsburgh cone, obviously offered in Pittsburgh, the Frito pie corn dog by the Houston Astros, the smoked bone-in beef short rib, and then the Foul Pole down in the Texas Rangers. Let me know in the comments out there. And that's a good transition. Speaking about the comments, if you're new to the program, GSMC Baseball has a Twitter page as well as a Facebook page and Instagram page. And then we also have a GSMC network page where you can follow all the different podcasts that the GSMC network offers. They got everything from fitness to business to money to sports to television to music. No matter what you are into, GSMC has a podcast available for you. But specifically with the baseball podcast, if you guys have made it all the way through here, just over an hour on Thursday, today, March 19th, or shortly thereafter, whenever you're listening to this, we're all at home kind of quarantined. So I know you have time watching Netflix, throw on the GSMC baseball podcast. Let me tell you what's going on out there. Do me a favor while you're listening on your iPhone. Head to Twitter. Follow the GSMC Baseball podcast there. Follow us on Facebook and comment. Let me know if you've had one of these Foul Poles, bone-in beef short ribs, or any of these other options that I was talking about here. But that wraps it up for today's episode. It was another good one. I appreciate you guys listening, making it this far into the episode. I am Kevin Mahalik. Once again, the coronavirus update. Coronavirus in general continues to drive the bus, drive the news cycle. Nobody's really sure what exactly is going on. I know we're getting more and more tests, the kits themselves sent to America from other countries, and in China, things are starting to slow down. We're finally seeing some positive information come out of China. Obviously, sending our love currently to everyone in Italy, as well as other places in the UK which now seems to be the new epicenter of this coronavirus outbreak. Obviously, here in the United States, some charts have us about 10 days behind Italy. So hopefully we can be smart out there. We can continue to help, practice social distancing. Those are the two key words that everybody's using now, social distancing. If you don't have to go out there, go out and about, please don't. Once again, I know I am one of the fortunate ones who is able to do a job such as be a podcast host from their basement, from their studio, still be able to submit it and get it out for you guys to give you guys quality content. I know everyone out there is not that fortunate. I do want to send a thank you out there to everyone in the healthcare service, all the nurses, doctors who are risking their health to do these tests and help these individuals who are sick, knowing that you are absolutely in harm's way, but are still willing to do so. So if you guys know anybody out there who's going through it right now within the healthcare system, reach out, shoot them a text, tell them you appreciate them and everything they're doing. They're going through a lot right now, and I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. But from a baseball perspective, in Monday's episode, we'll get into the NL East as well as the AL East, working our way back to the West Coast. Hopefully, we'll have a few more updates on the coronavirus and potentially steps moving forward. If not, we'll figure out something else to talk about because I love talking to you guys about baseball. I wish we would have regular season action and we could be talking about spring training games right now, but I'll be able to come up with enough to talk to you guys about, and I look forward to discussing with you once again on Monday. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask once again, please remember to subscribe to our show, write a nice review. That helps us spread the word. The reviews are very important, so if you could do that, once again, we appreciate it. Follow us on all the social media. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you Monday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.